Hi there, welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. Welcome to this ITC short on a new item for the collection that's going to be useful and beneficial, hopefully quite a bit more so in the future. So first let me ask you a question. What if I were to tell you that it was possible that you could actually play 4-player games on your Atari 2600 and possibly even on your Atari 7800? Impossible? Cool? What's the point? Well, I for one think it's a pretty neat idea. But the problem is, as you may know, is that the Atari 2600 and 7800 systems only came with 2 cartridge ports because, for the most part, all of the games for those systems were only designed for 2 people. Well, enter the QuadTari. Not only the latest addition to the Ivory Tower Collections game room, but also a cool little device that gives you the means to have up to 4 players simultaneously on games that support it on your Atari 2600 and 7800 system. Let's check this thing out. The QuadTari. As I already mentioned in the quick intro, it is basically a device that allows you to have up to 4 players simultaneously on single button joystick controllers able to play games that support it at the same time. 4 separate players with 4 separate movable sprite objects on the screen that you can move and compete against or play cooperatively. So how does it work necessarily? Well, for starters, you may notice that we've got 2 cables coming off the top of this thing, and that's because you'll see we have these A and B's marked at the top. That's because it plugs into joystick port 1 and joystick port 2 on your Atari systems respectively. And with each of those plugged in, it then provides you with 2 additional controller ports on the box itself. So what would be the purpose behind something like this? Is it just strictly for 4-player games? Well, no, not really. In fact, not only has the original creator made some games that support it already, but there's also several homebrew games, which I'll probably have a quick montage flashing up here of their boxes, that also take advantage of features of the QuadTari in some form of fashion. They might be the ability to actually play 4-player games, or give you the ability to plug in 2 controllers for 2-player games, and also be able to use something such as the SaveKey for saving game scores on Atari games that support it, or give you the ability to use an AtariVox, which, as the name implies, it's a speech synthesizer box, but also incorporates features of the SaveKey in it as well. Normally, to use devices like this, you have to plug them into controller port 2, and that's fine, but what if you have a 2-player game? What if you want to be able to play 2-player games and you have a SaveKey and you want to maintain your high scores, or you have the AtariVox and you want to maintain your high scores and also possibly hear speech from that game? How would that work on a normal Atari system? Well, normally you would just have to give up one of the players. It would be basically a 1-player only experience. But with the QuadTari, it is actually possible to plug in one of the cables into one side of the controller port, in this case player 1's controller port on the left side of the system, and then plug in the AtariVox or your SaveKey into the right controller port or player 2 port, and if the game has been programmed to support it, you would be able to have 2 players operating from the QuadTari box independently, able to play a 2-player game simultaneously, and also be able to have the AtariVox or SaveKey as well. So you have your cake and eat it too in this case. So how does it work exactly? Let me go ahead and take the top of it off here. So here we're looking at the inside of the QuadTari itself, and you're going to notice in looking at this that obviously we have the 4 separate controller ports that have been added to the board, but we also have these 4 IC chips. What are these all about? Well, these are multiplexers, or for short, I've always just called them MUX chips. There's actually quite a few systems that use technology like this inside of them, mainly to allow you to use the 9 input pins on a controller port, but yet have more functionality on the controller itself than what it might normally allow. A lot of systems back in the day used this similar type of setup. I'm sure you have seen in the past team tap type devices or multiplayer type devices, such as on the TurboGrafx 16, which came with the what was it, the Turbo Tap as it was called, which allowed for additional player controllers for that system because the console itself only had one joystick port. There's also the Atari Jaguar, which has a Team Tap, or the Jaguar Team Tap. And then, of course, there was also multiplayer adapters for like the Sega Genesis and the Sega Saturn. And they all work basically the same way. They use IC logic chips and multiplexers to isolate the different input signals from all the different controller ports and send them back to the console in a way that the console and the game, programmed to recognize these, understands which player is coming from which, or which signals are coming from which controller to control which player on the screen. But yeah, so through the magic of these IC chips, being able to separate and isolate these different signals and send that to the console in a meaningful way that the game understands, we are able to have more than just the two standard players on these Atari games. It's very cool. So the QuadTari box, it was actually created, it is the brainchild of Nathan Tolbert, who develops and sells and offers these. They're not very expensive either. They are available in two separate types. They all come looking the same way, but you can either get a pre-assembled unit, which basically will arrive just like you see here with the cables already attached and the box as you see it here, ready to go, ready to be plugged in and used. But you can also get this in a kit version form, which is how I ordered mine. And the kit version basically is going to come with the housing, the two different pieces of the housing separated. All of the controller ports will be separated. They will not be soldered on. The two resistors you see here, as well as the controller chips, the multiplexer chips, none of that will be soldered in place, nor will the cable wires, the wire harnesses here for the controller cables that plug into the Atari. So the kit form is literally a build-it-yourself kind of kit that provides you with all the pieces needed. Now the advantage to the kit version is that it is cheaper to purchase versus the pre-assembled, and that's just because, you know, Nathan, whenever he's putting these together, he charges a little more for his time to assemble them, and that makes sense. Now, if you do get the kit version of this, one other thing I want to point out, because I'll be honest, I was impatient, but I wasn't paying close enough attention. You'll see right on here, we have some abbreviations, but basically what these are is, these are the wire colors that match up with the hole alignments, or with the vias on the controller port cables. And so that you don't have to really guess. This board and the color chart here is designed for these cables that come with the kit. And I didn't pay attention to that at first. I actually pinned these out myself and just thought I knew 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3. And I still ended up getting it backwards on both of these controller ports on one side. And as a result, it obviously didn't work at first for me. And then that's when I went back, took a look, took my time and noticed that the colors were right here on the PCB, telling you which color wires go into which color holes, because again, these color abbreviations are lined up in the same way they will be on the PCB whenever you see it. So yeah, make note of that. And then of course, whenever you're installing your IC chips, the PCB will have notches on the board indicating where the notches on the IC chips need to face. So again, you would just solder them down in place to match that up as well. Okay, so with that, I guess what I'll do here at this point is I will change the angle of my camera a little bit, and I will plug the QuadTari in, and I'll show you examples of how it can be used. Okay, I now have a sample setup in place here, and I know it looks like a confusing mess, so let me try to lay this all out. I apologize. Hopefully in your environment you'll have a little more room to set this up, make it look a little nicer. I'm a little cramped on space for the filming here, so I'm making do. So what's my goal? My goal is I want to have two independent player characters that can be controlled by two separate people at the same time on a game, but also still be able to support the features of my AtariVox device. Normally this isn't possible on a 2600 or a 7800 system because the AtariVox has to be plugged into one controller port, and then obviously the other controller port would be normally for the player one character. But here's how it works with a QuadTari. And keep in mind again, this is only for games that support the QuadTari. This doesn't magically give you 4 players for all games. And in fact, it doesn't even support standard 2 players on games that don't look for and recognize the QuadTari. So, here's how it works. I have the controller cable from side A of the QuadTari plugged into controller port 1 on the 7800. This then in turn has two separate controllers plugged into the ones marked 1 and 3 on the left half of the QuadTari. In this case, I've got one of my old trusty Epix 500XJ controllers, and then I also happen to have this NES style gamepad here. Another thing I need to mention is that the QuadTari only supports officially single button controllers. I have had some goofiness with my 7800, especially when I actually use two sets of controllers that have two buttons on them for independent use. Again, this is really only going to work for games that have single button control. So Genesis controllers and most of the 7800 controllers may be finicky on this and may not work. Additionally, the QuadTari is only designed for actual Atari systems like the 2600 and the 7800. It is not guaranteed to be compatible with all the clones, or with any of them really. So what game am I going to use as an example for today? I am going to use this game right here. This was released about, not quite 2 years ago officially, but it's been out for a little while. And it is Wizard of War Arcade from Champ Games. This is an excellent arcade conversion or port of the game Wizard of War to the Atari 2600. Easily rivals the original version from CBS Electronics back in the day. But one of the cool things about this game is that although it came out like I said, over a year ago, it already has built-in support for the QuadTari. So with this game, it is possible to have both player 1 and player 2 independently playing on the game, on the screen at the same time, with all the directional controls and fire button, and also supports speech from the AtariVox. And again, you can have multiple combinations. You could have 3 controllers, you could have 4 controllers. There's an upcoming game, like I said, there's a homebrew that actually uses the paddle controllers that you can plug in 4 complete sets of paddle controllers and have 8 players at once in that particular game. Of course, it only uses just the button on the paddle controllers for that. But yeah, so let's change the angle of the camera a little bit, back up towards my TV, and we'll fire this up and check it out. Okay, I have the camera resituated here. Let's fire up some Wizard of War Arcade for the 2600 on my 7800 through the QuadTari. You'll notice along the bottom it actually displays... Sorry, there was the speech kicking in. I'm going to reset this again real quick because I want you to take a look along the bottom and you will see that the game, upon boot up, will show that it detects a SaveKey device or the AtariVox, and it also will show that it detects the QuadTari. Watch. SaveKey found. QuadTari found. So right now I'm using my Epix 500XJ, which is actually plugged into the port marked as port 1 on the QuadTari. And this allows me to change my difficulty settings. And also allows me to swap back out between the title screen and the high score screen. And then what we can do is we can use the select button on the console to choose the mode of game we want. That's a single player game. That's another single player game, but using the yellow control character. This is a 2-player game with the blue character being controlled by a human and the yellow character, let me go back to that real quick, with the yellow character being computer controlled. Same thing there. And then this is a 2-player game with 2 independent people on the console. So let's check it out. Now obviously, me by myself, this is going to be a little hard to demonstrate, but I'm going to try it out. So right now I am using my Epix 500XJ, and I am using it to control the blue player character. And then if I switch over to my other controller, right here, my NES style gamepad, you can see that I can use it to also control the yellow player character. And obviously, if there was several of us here playing at the same time, we would be able to each pick up one of these controllers and take out the enemy monsters at the same time. And this also allows us to have the AtariVox connected for speech. So that's the QuadTari. It's a pretty cool little device. I'm pretty impressed with it. I like the look of it with the finished printing that's on the enclosure box that it comes with. It's a pretty professional looking piece of kit, if I say so. And it's got a decent price to go with it. I think it's very well priced for what it can do. I also like the fact that a lot of homebrew authors currently making games for both the 2600 and even the 7800 are looking into adding additional or adding in support for their up-and-coming games with this, in addition to the games that already exist. So how do you get one of these? Well, basically, if you want more information, I'll put a link down in the video description on the Atari Age forums that talks about that talks all about this. But aside from that, you can actually purchase your QuadTari from BiteTheChili.com. That's because Bite the Chili Productions is the company name that Nathan uses for selling his QuadTari devices. And so again, that's BiteTheChili.com. So again, I'll probably have a link for it in the video description. Maybe I'll even put a graphic here along the bottom of the video. But yeah, so the QuadTari, pretty cool little box, and we've all finally have a multi-tap, multiplayer device for playing independent, or 4 complete controller independent simultaneous games on our Atari 2600 and 7800 systems. It's pretty cool. Check it out.